All right, we're live. Hello, Ocean Shores. I'm so glad to participate in the Ocean Shores Irish Music Festival, even though I'm doing it virtually. I would have loved to have been in Washington at the Pacific Ocean this week for the Irish Music Festival. Frankly, I haven't been to a festival in the entire year 2020. The best we can do are these virtual festivals. Well, I'm David McDonnell. Been a storyteller at the Irish Music Festival in Ocean Shores at Galway Bay Irish Pub for several years. And this video is actually serving two purposes. And I'm going to tell you today a story, and then I'm going to tell you the story about the story. But let me tell you about the two purposes of this video. Since the pandemic and the closing, obviously, of every venue possible for an Irish music festival of any sort, Irish pubs, even libraries and other venues, every venue has been shut down for a gathering, and it's meant that I have been unable to get in front of a live audience and tell stories. What I've been left to is telling my stories to this wee little camera mounted on the top of my monitor. And I've done that by doing a podcast. I've been doing a podcast every Sunday night at 6 o'clock for a half hour or so, usually less. It's called Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and that's where I live, Antrim County, Michigan. And it's an interesting route because 100 plus years ago, my ancestors, me people, came from County Antrim in Ireland. And after a century or more, here I am in County Antrim in Michigan. And I do a weekly podcast. And again, I call it Random Thoughts from County Antrim because they are my random thoughts. I tell some stories, some yarns, historical tidbits, news of the day, whatever tickles my fancy, and whatever random thoughts come out of my wee brain. And there's another purpose. For those of you tuning in to my ordinary weekly podcast, I have another purpose for this video. And that is the good folks at Galway Bay Irish Pub in Ocean Shores, Washington, who sponsor this wonderful, brilliant festival every single October. Tuesday through Sunday. It's just one of the best Irish festivals. Not the biggest. They bill themselves as the biggest festival in the West Coast, Irish festival in the West Coast. They probably are. They certainly aren't the biggest festival nationally, but what's one of the best. It's just a very nice, intimate setting. You're up close and personal with the artist. You get to know the patrons real well because most of them come for several days, and it just makes it a wonderful, brilliant place to hear Irish music and to even hear a few Irish stories. And this year they invited me to be part of the virtual festival. So here it is. My story that I'm going to tell you for the Galway Bay Irish Music Festival in Ocean Shores, Washington. And also my weekly podcast on this Sunday in October. Now the story I want to tell you is called the Tayman. Now the Tayman was a seller of Tay. And if you know anything about the Irish, you know the Irish love their Tay. They'll have Tay in the morning, Tay in the afternoon, Tay in the evening. It is indeed by far the favorite non-alcoholic beverage of the Irish. Now in days gone by, and particularly in rural Ireland, the Irish couldn't get their Tay at a store for a very simple reason. There weren't any stores. And because of that, there were entrepreneurial men. Women weren't in this profession, but there were entrepreneurial men who tried to make a living by selling Tay. And the Tayman in the story went to the nearest town of any substance where he could buy Tay in bulk. And he had to go to the gambling man to borrow money at usurious interest rates to buy the Tay. And he bought enough to fill his satchel. Big satchel that he could put over his shoulder. and walk around. And once he filled his satchel full of tea, he went walking on his journey, village to village, house to house. And his plan was very simple. Sell it all. Everybody got home, pay off the Gambine man, and what was left was his profit. Now, he'd been on the road for several weeks. Again, village to village, house to house, selling his tea. And his satchel was still more than half full, so he still had a ways to go. And it was a low-margin business, as you might imagine. So he didn't stay at an inn or a B&B, or certainly not the Marriott. At the end of the day, he'd find a warm place that he could stay, start a little fire, and spend the night outside. If it looked like it rained, it was going to rain, which, you know what, it often does in Ireland, he'd find a place where he thought he could stay dry, usually under a bridge. Sometimes people would let him stay in a barn or lean to something that he could stay dry at night during the rain. But that's how he lived on this journey. Now, he was heading west after being on the road for several weeks, and he could see on the horizon on the west, the sky was beginning to get dark. And the clouds he could see were just dark black clouds. Behind him on the east, it was still nice blue skies. But on the ahead of him, the skies were dark, foreboding. And he knew what that meant. It meant that there was a storm coming in from the Atlantic, as it does from time to time. So he knew he had to find shelter, because the storm, it looked like, from the way he could see it, was going to be horrific. So he began to look for a place to stay, but then he saw on the horizon another house. It wasn't in a village, it was kind of off by itself. And he thought, as the satchel still wasn't empty, he thought, maybe I'll try to make one more sale. And after I do that, then I'll look for a place to stay. So he walked up to the house, he knocked on the door. A man answered, "So what can I do for you?" The Tayman said, "I'm here to sell you some tea." Excuse me. And the man said, "Well, you know what? We are in need of tea. Come on in." So the Tayman walked into the house. It was a typical Irish hovel. One room, dirt floor. There was a single bed. There was a table in the middle with a couple of stools. There was a crib in the corner for the wee one. And it also had a stove, which was somewhat unusual for rural Ireland at the time. Most cooking in rural Ireland was done with a fire in the middle on the floor, and you cook right over the burning fire, and the smoke would kind of go up and seep through the thatched roof. But this one actually had a stove. As he walked in the house, the first thing that it struck him was that something was baking in the oven, and it smelled like a cake. Now, the Tayman had been on the road for several days, and he hadn't eaten much in those several weeks, actually. And certainly I never had a freshly baked cake. So the aroma from this cake was just wonderful, and it just made it so pleasant to go inside the house. So he went inside, he sat on one of the stools at the table, the husband sat down across the table from him. The wife was doing various things, sometimes sitting down, sometimes going over to the stove. They had a conversation. They talked about the tea. Tayman quoted him a price, haggled a little bit, and they finally agreed on a price, talked about an appropriate quantity. The husband trying to figure out how much money he had, how much he could afford. They finally agreed how much he could afford to buy, and they made their deal. Boom, boom. Sale made. Now, as they completed the sale, handed over the tea, the husband handed over some money. Everything's good. And the Tayman says, I feel that there is a storm coming. I could see the clouds as I was walking over to your house. I think I must say goodbye now, because I have to go out and find a nice, warm, dry place to spend the night. Now, when he said that, the husband said, "No, no, no. You can't do that. I think there is a storm coming. You're welcome to stay with us." He said, "You can't go out if it's a serious storm. You stay in our house with us. You'll keep dry and you can leave in the morning." Now, Tayman was delighted to hear that because he didn't have to go out in the rain. And so they continued their conversation. They continued to talk about what the farmer did and what the Tayman did and where he was from. And it was a very pleasant evening. And after a while of that, the wife got up, walked over to the stove, opened up the stove, grabbed the pan, the baking pan, lifted it up, carried it over the table, put it smack dab in the middle of the table. Oh, and the aroma was so nice. The Tayman just thought that was one of the most pleasant things he had seen or felt in his entire journey. So they continued to talk for a while, and when the Tayman could bear it no longer, he said, "Please, madam, I must say your cake smells so wonderful. The aroma is just brilliant. Could I please have a slice of your cake?" The wife said, "Certainly," and she got up and she went to get a knife and got ready to cut the cake when the husband said, "No! You know you can't cut a cake when it's still warm. He's going to have to wait till morning, like the rest of us." So obviously the Tayman was disappointed, but he was the guest, and of course he had to live by the rules of the house. So they continued the conversation for a while, and finally it came time to go to bed. Now, if you've been paying attention to my story, you might have remembered that I said there was but one bed in the house. So when it became time to go to bed, the Tayman was a little puzzled, but the husband jumped up, walked over to the bed, which was kind of in the middle of the room, and he shoved it against the wall. And he pointed to his wife, "You shall sleep here," pointing to the end of the bed right against the wall. Then he said, "I shall sleep right here in the middle of the bed. And Tayman, you can sleep here, end of the bed," which was furthest from the wall. Perhaps a bit strange, perhaps not. And then he told the Tayman, "Turn around." And when he turned around, the wife got on her nightgown and climbed under the covers in bed right against the wall. And when she'd done so, he said to the Tayman, "Now you can put on your night clothes." And the Tayman did, and the husband did, climbed in the bed. Wife on one end against the wall, husband in the middle, Tayman on the other end. And it wasn't long before the three of them fell asleep. Now the husband had a problem. Nowadays it would be a medical problem that we would have some name for, but to be delicate, or to use the parlance of the day, his problem was one of frequency. And it wasn't long after he fell asleep that he knew he had to get up because of his problem with frequency, and he had to use the facilities. Again, when I described the house for you, you may have noticed that there were no indoor facilities. The facilities were outside. Now, by this time, the storm had hit, and in fact, it was raining really, really hard. It was coming down. You could feel it. You could hear it, the wind blowing and the rain hitting the house. Now, the husband had to go outside to use the facilities, but he didn't want to leave his wife inside, in bed, with the Tayman. So he woke her up, grabbed her by the arm, and said, "We must go outside." And she was still a little groggy from just waking up, but he dragged her outside, forced her to stand outside the facilities and outside the house while he went inside the facilities to relieve his problem of frequency. Now, of course, he was dry inside the facilities, but she's outside the facilities, getting drenched from this cold, cold rain that's coming in and the storm that came in off the Atlantic. Now, when he finished his business, grabbed her by the hand, led her back into the house, She is sopping wet, top to bottom. And she climbs into bed, sopping wet, gets under the covers. So she's against the wall, wet. He's in the middle of the bed. Tayman's still on the other side. They all fall asleep, but it's not too long after that the husband has to get up again because, as you recall, he had a problem with frequency. So he got up, walked outside, took his wife with him. She's standing outside. She's sopping wet, getting wetter and wetter and wetter while he uses the facilities. And when he's done, he brings her back in. They go back to bed. Wife on one side, husband in the middle, Tayman on the other. And they fall asleep, but it's not too long after that he has to get up yet again. So he grabs his wife, and his wife said, "No, I'm not going back out in that storm. You go out on your own. I'm too wet. I haven't dried out from the last time you had to use the facilities." So the husband says, "What do I do?" So he finally decides. He grabs the crib, which is on the other end of the house, other end of the room, picks up the crib, puts the crib smack in the middle. Wife's on one end, crib's in the middle. Tayman's on the other side. The husband goes outside and uses the facilities. Comes back in, removes the crib, lays down in the middle. Everything's solved yet again. The problem now, excuse my cough. I don't have the virus, but I got something. It's been bugging me for quite some time. What are you going to do? Can't see a doctor nowadays because their doctor's offices are closed. Certainly they're closed to anybody who's sick. One of the great ironies of life. But in any event, as the husband lays down in bed in the middle, the storm getting worse, and he hears the door of the facilities kind of flapping. And he hears the hinges kind of flapping, coming off. And he hears pieces of the roof pieces just kind of flying away. And he hears the walls of the facilities rattling. And he begins to realize this storm is so bad, it's likely to take away his facilities, which is a bad thing for anybody, but certainly a difficult thing if you have a problem with frequency. So the husband jumps out of bed, runs outside to try to fix the facilities. And you know the issue. Whenever you have a problem, you kind of focus on that problem. But when you have another problem, sometimes you forget the first problem. You know, like when you have a toothache, and that's all you can think about is that toothache. Dominates your thoughts. And then you stub your foot, and you forget all about the toothache. Well, that's what happened to the husband. He'd been fixated with the problem of how he shares a bed with his wife and the Tayman. That was problem number one. But problem number two was making sure his facilities didn't get blown away, which meant he forgot all about problem number one. So he ran out of the house and he's trying to tie a rope around the roof so it doesn't blow away, and he's trying to fix the door of the facility. He's trying to do whatever he can, getting sopping wet as he does it. Now all of this commotion wakes up the wife. And she thinks to herself, she knows her husband very well. She knows he's going to be out there for a long, long time trying to fix the facilities. So what does she do? She's on one side of the bed, it's empty in the middle, Tayman's on the other side. Well, what she does is she rolls over to the middle of the bed, flat on her back. And she says to the Tayman, "Okay, Tayman, now's your chance." The Tayman, who was awake by this time as well, says, "You're right, now's my chance." And the Tayman jumps out of bed, runs over to the table, and cuts himself a piece of cake. Now that's the story of the Tayman. I'm going to tell you a story about that story. I wish that were my story. I wish I had the imagination to have invented that story, created that story. But it was a story written by Eamon Kelly, a wonderful Irish storyteller, He was an actor, TV actor, play actor, and also a storyteller. And he had his own television show in Ireland in the 1960s on RTE, radio television. And the television show was simply him sitting on a couch in a pub or somebody's living room, whatever, and 4 or 5 people in the audience. And there was one camera, they would show him tell a story and sometimes turn and show the audience reaction. And it was just a wonderful show because all it was his stories. And he had such a repertoire of wonderful, wonderful stories. And that was in the 1960s. And it wasn't several years ago. I think it was within a couple of weeks before I was leaving for Ocean Shores to participate as a storyteller at the Irish Music Festival in Ocean Shores. When I was doing some research on storytelling, I was flipping around the internet, and I came across this television show on RTE. And I saw these stories done by Eamon Kelly. Saw several of them. And the one that just jumped out at me was the Tayman. I just thought it was a wonderful story. And as a craftsman, I won't go into it now, but as a craftsman, you'll see some of the beauties of that story, of crafting that particular story. But I just loved it. And I made no effort to memorize it or learn it. I wasn't sure when I was ever going to do it. But I got to Ocean Shores within a few weeks, and I told the story publicly, first time ever, at Ocean Shores. I can't even tell you what year that was. And the audience loved it. Now, I left Ocean Shores. The festival was in October, as it always is. I left Ocean Shores. My wife and I flew to Ireland because we were doing a Irish Storytelling Festival in Ireland in that November. And I did a repertoire that I put together. I was a little nervous about being an American storyteller of Irish tales, telling Irish stories in Ireland. I just wasn't sure how Irish audiences would react to that. I wasn't even sure if Irish audiences would understand me. I have a particularly strong American Midwest accent, so I didn't even know if the Irish folks could even understand what I was saying, or whether they would appreciate an American telling Irish stories. So I had a repertoire for this festival. I knew what I was going to say. I had just a list of what I wanted to do, stories that I thought might go over well. And we arrived in Ireland several days before the festival. It was in County Kerry, Sneem Storytelling Festival, County Kerry. And we decided, because we had several days, that we'd go up to County Clare, to Cliffs of Moher, and spend some time at Doolin. And we had flown, the typical flight to Ireland. You fly all night long, you leave in the evening, and then you arrive first thing in the morning, Irish time. And we drove, as soon as we landed, we drove to Clare. We did some sightseeing along the way, booked a B&B, went out to dinner, did a bunch of things. And then it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. Hadn't slept in a day and a half, it seems like. And then we went to the pub. Gus O'Connor's, I think, is which pub it was. There's a couple of pubs in Doolin. And we went at the pub lawn before a session broke out. Just a wonderful tradition in Ireland. Just a musician sits down, another one sits down. Before you know it, you have 4 or 5 playing some wonderful, wonderful music. There's no set. They just keep playing. They play this, and they play that. Someone else joins in. And then they take a break. Someone would stand up and sing a song. And this went on all night. I think we got to the pub about 6 o'clock. We were there drinking and socializing, and it was pushing midnight or beyond. Again, I had slept in a day and a half. And just a wonderful, wonderful evening. And if you know anything about my wife, I mean, we had been socializing, both of us, with the people in the pub. But if you know anything at all about my wife, you know that she talks to everybody she meets. And you meet her 30 seconds later, you know her life story. So it wasn't long before everybody in the pub knew who we were, where we were from, why we were in Ireland. They all knew the entire story. They probably knew the names of all my kids and the names of my pets. I mean, everything. So now it's around midnight. I'm getting tired. Probably had too much to drink. And I'm getting ready to, thinking mentally, I got to get ready to leave. When the musicians started packing up, they had a full night as well. And then someone stood up and said, I understand there's a Shawnee in the house. An American Shawnee. He said, Shawnee, please tell us a story. So there was silence for a few moments. I'm trying to think who Shawnee, by the way, if you don't know, is an Irish storyteller. And I looked around and I said, I wonder if there's another storyteller in the room, or is there an American storyteller in the room? And then I realized she was talking about me. And she said, Shawnee, please tell us a story. So I had no choice. I got up, stood up, and I had no set prepared. It wasn't an act that I was going to do. I just said, tell me a story. So I told the first story that popped in my head, and that was the Tayman. And so I told the story of the Tayman. And the audience just got very much into it. And I think when I just told, I got to look at my clock here, I think when I told it to you, it took about 10, 15 minutes. I've told that story even shorter. But 10, 15 minutes is probably enough. But telling it at the pub at Gus O'Connor's, I think I was telling the story for half an hour. And it was because people kept joining in. They kept adding things. And they said, what about, I think the Atlantic storm that was destroying the facilities turned into a tornado. And the tornado just got picked up the facilities, and it landed in Kansas. I mean, the audience kept taking the story in so many different directions. And it was actually a struggle for me to kind of go with the flow, have fun with what they were saying and adding to it, but yet trying to steer the story eventually back to where it was supposed to go. But we did, and we just had a wonderful time doing it. And I finally get to the end where the wife says, Tayman, now's your chance. And the Tayman jumps up and cuts himself a piece of cake. The story's over. And everyone in the pub just started laughing, started clapping. And just a wonderful, wonderful reception. They all loved the story. Now, maybe that was a function of being midnight and having a lot to drink, but everyone loved the story. And again, I wish it was my story, but it's Eamon Kelly's story. Now, after I sat down, I had a couple of thoughts. One is, I guess I can pull off as an American, I can pull off going to Ireland and telling Irish stories. So that was gratifying. But the other was the incredible journey this story took. To come out of the imagination of Eamon Kelly in the 1960s, bounce around who knows where, to somehow land on the internet where I pick it up 40, 50 years later and fall in love with it immediately. And then retell it in Ireland after whatever that is, a 7,000-mile round trip from Ireland to America, back to Ireland. 7,000 miles, 5 decades later. And to the Irish audience, it was a fresh, entertaining, enlightening, wonderful, brilliant story. And to me, that just tells all you need to know about a good story. So thank you, Ocean Shores, for inviting me here. Thank you for my regular podcast viewers for letting me take up a half hour of your time this evening. Don't forget to go to clandonnell.net, my website, which is being revamped, but it's going to be brilliant very, very soon. Take a look at my books, Buy the Horse of Guinness and Clandonnell. Send me an email at clandonnell@gmail.com. Take a look at my Facebook site. But whatever else, whether you're in Ocean Shores or anywhere else, be safe, be careful, and do the right thing. Enjoy, and goodbye.